Hi everyone, this is Ben from DreamFactory. In this short video, I'm going to cover API limits. So in one of my previous videos, I covered API logging, and in version 2.5 of DreamFactory, we released a new feature that we call API limits. Now, please note that this is a proprietary feature, so if you go to dreamfactory.com/products, you'll see all of the products that we have. API limits and API management in general is part of our gold package, and you can learn more about the feature set there at dreamfactory.com/products. So this video will be pretty quick. I'm just going to give everyone a quick overview of what API limits are and show a quick example of how to use them in action. So here in my demo environment, I have some API limits set up. Now, the idea of an API limit is very simple. You basically enforce a number of API calls per period of time. So to create a limit, via the UI, you just give the limit a name, a description. You can select whether you want it to be for the whole instance. Here I'm running on localhost, but whatever server you're running DreamFactory on, that would be the whole instance. User, meaning a particular end user. Each user, meaning apply to all end users that are hitting the API. Service, which means an API. A particular API that you want to enforce limits on. Role, which means user role. Service by user, so for a particular user and a particular API, enforce a limit. And then service by each user, meaning all users for a given service. So you can set up as many of these as you need. A quick example here that I'll show just in a few minutes. I have an instance level API limit set up at 100,000 per hour, one for a particular end user, at 2,000 per hour, a particular service. So this is the DB service. I'm saying apply only 1,000 API calls per hour and limit that. A service for a particular end user. So in this case, the end user Ben Bussey and the service DB. And then I've applied one for the sales role. So you can have as many roles as you want, and for each of those roles, you can apply API limits on top of the role. So that's how it works. Now to make some API calls, let's just quickly, I'll demonstrate how it works. If I log out here for a moment, and I'll actually log in as a particular end user. So I'll log in here, and I'm just going to go straight to the API docs and just make a couple of API calls. So in the real world here, you'd build some application and end users would be hitting that application. So let me just do something like, retrieve some records real quick just to hit the API a couple of times. So we'll hit this contact table. Now remember, this is part of the DB service, which I also have an API limit on. So this particular API call, and I'll hit it a couple of different times just to hit it multiple times. And now I'll just log back out and then log in as an administrator so we can actually see what happened in the API limits user interface. So I log back in here, go to limits, and you'll notice obviously that some API calls have been hit here. Now these API calls apply in each of these cases because as an end user, I hit the instance, of course, I hit the API limits for my particular user, I hit the DB service, and this is the intersection of the DB service and my end user name here. And then I'm also a member in this example of the sales role, so that hit. So you'll notice we hit the API call a couple of times, but there was also a login and a log out API call made when I authenticated with that end user, and hence that's why there are 5 API calls in this example. So that's about it. In terms of the user interface, a couple other quick things to show. You can easily clear the API cache. So if you want to reset a limit, you just hit this and hit the OK on the confirmation, and that'll reset the limit counter back to 0. You can do that with any of these. You can obviously delete these and add them, and you can have as many API limits as you want. The only other thing quickly to show is the live API documentation for the actual, actually I'm in the wrong swagger here. So the API limits are actually all API calls. So everything that you do in the user interface here, you can also do by API call. And this actually shows up in the API docs. So you can obviously, apply limits, update limits, and so forth. You can do the same with clearing the cache or deleting the cache, all programmatically as API calls. So that's helpful for doing bulk updates if you don't want to operate everything out of the user interface. So that's a quick overview. I will point out that we have a blog post written March 20th. So again, this is a 2.5 feature. As of March 20th, there's a blog post which quickly runs through some of the features I covered here. So please take a look at that and try it out. And also, if you want a demo of all this, I will point out that you can go to dreamfactory.com/products and request a gold demo, or you can contact our sales team for a demo, sales@dreamfactory.com, and they can give you a more in-depth overview of how it all works. Okay, thank you.